It was a bustling afternoon at the airport. Travelers moved quickly with their luggage, some smiling, others bickering, many clearly worn out from long flights. Flight 227 to West Africa was now boarding. A handful of passengers waited in the first-class lounge, sipping drinks and scrolling through their phones. Among them sat a quiet man dressed in a plain black caftan. His shoes were clean but modest, his bag small, his expression calm and unreadable. He said nothing, just observed. He held a first class, a ticket. A few glanced at him, then glanced again. A black man, seated alone in the first-class area, simply dressed. He didn't look like a business traveler. He wasn't flashy, didn't carry a laptop bag or wear a watch. Yet there he was, waiting calmly for his flight like the rest. When the announcement came, "First-class passengers, please proceed to Gate 4. He stood and joined the line. At the gate, a slender woman with golden hair tied in a bun and bright red lipstick greeted passengers. Her name tag read Clara. She beamed at the man in front of him, a white man in a designer suit, and scanned his ticket. "Welcome aboard, sir," she said warmly. Then came the quiet man. She looked at his dark skin, then at his simple clothes. Her smile disappeared. "Excuse me, sir," she said, raising her arm to stop him. "This line is for first-class passengers." He silently handed her his ticket. She stared at it. Her face tightened. "Seat 2A. That can't be right," she murmured. She looked him over, disbelief in her eyes. "Sir, this flight isn't meant for someone of your background. You can't sit here." Nearby, passengers began to pay attention. "Excuse me?" he asked, still calm. Clara's voice grew louder. "I said this flight isn't for someone of your color. You probably booked economy by mistake, or someone else used your card." A young woman behind him gasped. A man in business attire frowned. Phones began to rise as passengers started recording. Still, Clara pressed on. "Let's not waste time. Sir, we'll refund your money," she said, brushing her hand as though dusting off her uniform. "Now, please step aside. You're holding up the line." But the man didn't move. He looked at her, quietly, steadily, his gaze calm yet firm. "I purchased a first-class ticket. My seat is 2A, she scoffed. "You probably can't even pronounce the airline's name, and yet you want to sit in first class?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A junior staff member, young, wearing glasses, walked over. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Clara leaned in. "This guy's trying to sneak into first class with a fake ticket," she whispered. The junior attendant scanned the ticket with a handheld device. It beeped softly. A green checkmark appeared. "It's valid," he said. He spoke in a low voice. Clara's expression hardened with anger. "That's not the point," she snapped. "Just look at him. Do you honestly think he should be in seat 2A? By now, a small crowd, 5 or 6 passengers, had started recording on their phones. The man stepped aside politely to let a mother with her baby pass. Then, turning back to Clara, he said in an even tone, "I'm not here to cause any trouble. I simply want to take my seat." The junior flight attendant looked uneasy. "Clara, maybe we should... Do you want to risk your job over this?" Clara cut him off sharply. The quiet man sighed and stepped forward. "I'll take my seat now," he said with composure. Clara stood motionless, unsure of her next move. Her grip on the situation was slipping in full view of the passengers. True. Last, she stepped aside but muttered under her breath, "Don't say I didn't warn you. Let's see how long you stay in that seat." He entered the cabin without a word. All eyes followed him, some filled with sympathy, others with uncertainty. The atmosphere was cool and quiet, the air scented with leather seats and a hint of cologne. Seat 2A, next to the window, awaited him. He placed his bag in the overhead compartment and sat down. From his pocket, he pulled out a small notebook and pen and began writing. No expression, no complaint, not even a sigh. Clara walked into the cabin a moment later. She observed him silently for a few seconds, then turned to serve drinks, deliberately skipping over him. Just a few rows away, the French CEO, François Delicourt, adjusted his tie and leaned back comfortably. He glanced briefly at the dark-skinned man in 2A, but didn't say a word. A soft chime sounded overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for takeoff. Please fasten your seatbelts." The man closed his notebook and turned to the window. As the engines roared, the ground below vanished into clouds. But inside the aircraft, something unseen was brewing. A quiet turbulence, not of wind, but of tension and truth. None of them, neither the CEO nor the sharp-tongued flight attendant, nor the silent onlookers, knew who the man in seat 2A really was, but they would soon find out. And when they did, the weight of that truth would shake them deeply. The plane sliced through the sky like a silent arrow. Inside the first-class cabin, calmness hung in the air, though beneath it, tension simmered. The man in 2A sat quietly, seatbelt fastened. He didn't ask for champagne or recline his seat like the others. He simply gazed out the window, lost in thought. His eyes hinted at a life full of stories, experiences he held quietly within. Flight attendant Clara moved through the aisle offering drinks and snacks, her smile polite yet forced. To everyone but him, it appeared genuine. When she reached seat 2B, an older French woman with pearl earrings greeted her with a warm smile and asked, "Green tea, please." Clara nodded. "Of course, ma'am." Then she turned sharply to the man in 2A. "What would you like to drink?" she asked, her voice flat, lacking warmth. He looked up with calm eyes. "Just water, please." She rolled her eyes. "We have sparkling or still. Choose one." "Still is fine," he replied, still composed. She turned without a word and went to fetch it. She brought him a bottle of water, but unlike the others, she didn't place it on a napkin. She didn't smile. She didn't even say, "Here you urn. Go." Instead, she let it drop onto his tray table, nearly knocking it over. Calmly, he picked it up, secured the cap, and took a sip. Still composed, still silent. Across the aisle, François Delors observed quietly. He frowned. Something about Clara's behavior toward the man didn't sit well with him. François had dealt with his share of arrogance in the business world, but this wasn't arrogance. It was composed confidence. The man had barely said 10 words since boarding, yet there was a quiet dignity about him, almost regal. Clara passed through again, distributing warm towels, but skipped seat 2A entirely. The man remained silent, offering no protest, but passengers began to notice. A woman in 2B leaned toward the aisle and whispered, "Why does she keep ignoring him? He hasn't done anything wrong." A man in 3C muttered to his wife, "Maybe she thinks he doesn't belong here." Back in economy, the usual commotion carried on. Passengers chatting, babies crying, light turbulence gently swaying the cabin. But in first class, the atmosphere was shifting. Something was about to unfold. The younger flight attendant, the same one who had scanned the man's boarding pass earlier, quietly approached Clara at the front of the cabin. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" he asked. Clara sighed, clearly irritated. "What now?" He leaned in and spoke softly. "You need to stop acting like that man doesn't exist. People are starting to notice. Some are recording." Clara's expression hardened. "Let them record," she snapped. "Let the world see. That seat doesn't belong to people like him. Sure, he paid for it, but that doesn't mean he belongs here. He knows it, and so do I." The younger attendant looked stunned. "You're crossing a line." "No," Clara said, her voice low and sharp. "He crossed the line. People like him need to remember their place. They want to pretend. Kings shouldn't sit where they don't belong. If they do, let them face the consequences." The plane jolted again, harder this time. A sudden bump caused a few passengers to grip their armrests. Clara turned sharply and walked briskly back to the first-class cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came through the speaker, "we're passing through a brief storm. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." Clara moved down the aisle, checking belts. When she reached seat 2A again, she paused. "You better buckle up tight," she said with a faint smirk. "Wouldn't want you flying out of your seat." The man looked at her and replied calmly, "Thank you for the reminder." She wasn't expecting that. Her smile disappeared, and she moved on. Once the turbulence passed and calm returned, lunch was served. Trays of elegant meals were placed in front of the first-class passengers. Clara dropped a tray in front of the man in 2A. "Here. Hope this is good enough for you," she said flatly. He looked at the tray and nodded. "Thank you." Francois had seen enough. He leaned toward Clara and spoke quietly. "Excuse me, but why are you treating that man so disrespectfully?" Clara's face flushed. "Sir, please mind your own business." "I am," Francois replied. "I paid for peace, not to watch you insult a fellow passenger." Others nodded in agreement. Someone clapped softly from the back. Clara spun around and stormed to the galley. Inside, she paced furiously. "How dare they take his side?" she whispered. "Who does he think he is?" Back in 2A, the quiet man closed his eyes and breathed slowly. He was familiar with storms, both in the sky and in life. But this one felt different. It wasn't just about race. It was about dignity, about staying silent when silence is heavy, about staying composed under pressure. He reached into his coat pocket and touched a small folded piece of fabric, his country's emblem. He didn't wear it today. He didn't need to. It lived in his heart. Suddenly, the intercom came on again. "Cabin crew, prepare for arrival. 30 minutes to landing." Passengers sat up straighter. Trays were cleared, bags zipped, but the tension in first class lingered. Clara returned one last time before descent. She stood near 2A, arms folded, glaring at him. "Hope next time you pick the right cabin," she said coldly. "You're lucky we didn't remove you before takeoff." He looked up. His voice was steady. "Sometimes the seat we choose isn't about money. It's about what we stand for. I'll keep choosing this seat, not for comfort, but for what needs to change." His words echoed in her mind. She didn't fully understand them, but they made her feel small. As the plane began its descent, the clouds parted and the city lights of Ouagadougou twinkled below. Passengers got ready to disembark. The man in 2A picked up his small bag, stood tall, and waited. No one, not Clara, not Francois, not the curious passengers filming on their phones, knew the truth. When those wheels touched down, the quiet man would leave the plane not just as a traveler, but as its most powerful occupant. The wheels landed with a soft bounce. Cabin lights came on. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the announcement, "welcome to Ouagadougou. Please remain seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop." A few claps echoed. Some passengers stretched, others sighed in relief. But in first class, every eye was still fixed on one man, seat 2A. The quiet African man had said almost nothing the entire flight. Even after being mistreated, he sat still, calm, unshaken, like a mountain unmoved by the wind. But Clara, the lead flight attendant, wasn't finished. As passengers unbuckled and collected their bags, she returned. Her voice was low, but sharp. "Wish you'd never boarded this flight," she said. He looked up slowly. Still, he said nothing. She leaned in closer so only he could hear. "You smell like someone who hasn't bathed in a month," she hissed with a cruel smile. "You think first class makes you clean? It just makes this cabin stink." He blinked once, silent. But his gaze, calm and full of quiet strength, met hers. The woman in seat 2B, an older French lady, had been watching. She didn't hear everything, but Clara's expression said enough. "That's enough," she said firmly. Clara turned to her. "Stay out of this." The woman shook her head. "No, I won't. You've lost control and gone too far." Clara laughed nervously. "You think he belongs here? Look at him." François Delicourt, the French CEO, stood up slowly. He had stayed quiet long enough. "Clara," he said, "you've embarrassed yourself. You've embarrassed this airline, and all of us," François said firmly. Clara froze. "He has done nothing wrong," François continued. "He paid for his seat, acted with dignity, and displayed more grace than you could ever understand. You may not recognize him, but I can tell he is a man of great character." Clara's cheeks flushed with a mix of anger and shame. "I did what I thought was appropriate. We have standards here." "No," François said sharply. "What you have is prejudice." By now, a crowd of passengers had gathered near the first-class cabin. Some overheard the confrontation, others had witnessed the entire exchange. Several were still recording. Then the cabin door opened. A breeze drifted in from the tarmac. Airport staff stood below with mobile stares. But something unexpected caught everyone's attention. A sleek black car with tinted windows was parked near the aircraft. 5 uniformed soldiers stood at attention. A long red carpet had been rolled out beside the stairs. Passengers craned their necks to see. "Is someone famous on board?" someone whispered. "Maybe royalty," another guessed. Clara looked puzzled. "We didn't receive any VIP notification." Then something unusual occurred. The junior flight attendant who had scanned the man's ticket earlier approached Clara. His expression was tense, but resolute. "Clara," he said, holding out his phone, "you need to see this." She grabbed the phone and looked. Her expression dropped. It was a photo of the man in seat 2A, but not on a plane. He was in full military uniform standing before a massive crowd. Flags waved in the background and soldiers saluted him. The caption read, "President Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso." Clara's hands trembled. She looked up quickly, searching for the man. He was now standing, quietly retrieving his bag from the overhead bin. "No, this can't be," she whispered. He walked toward the door in silence. "Wait," Clara called, her tone now soft. "Sir." He stopped and turned. Her lips quivered. "I didn't know. I didn't mean to." "President." Traoré looked at her calmly. There was no anger, no bitterness in his eyes, just a quiet certainty. "Would it have changed anything if you had known?" he asked gently. Clara opened her mouth, but no words came. "Respect," he said, "is not a privilege reserved for the powerful. It is a duty owed to every person." Then he turned and stepped off the plane. The sun outside was bright. The soldiers snapped to attention. One opened the car door. But the president paused. He looked back toward the aircraft. Inside, passengers watched from the windows. Some were wiping away tears. Others shook their heads in regret. François stepped down and caught up with him. "Mr. President," he said humbly, "please accept our apologies. I had no idea. Your humility is deeply inspiring." President Traoré offered a soft smile. "Sometimes," he replied, "we must walk humbly to see the true depth of others' hearts." They shook hands. Back inside, Clara sat in an empty seat, pale and shaken. The junior attendant stood beside her. "You didn't just insult a president," he said quietly. "You insulted everyone who looks like him." The captain exited the cockpit. "Prepare a written report," he instructed. "Expect to be questioned." Clara buried her face in her hands. Outside, cameras flashed. The red carpet remained unrolled, and the quiet man from seat 2A stepped into his black car, not with pride, but with quiet resolve. He had boarded as a passenger, but he departed as a message. News of the incident spread before the wheels had even touched the ground. By the time the last bags were unloaded, the videos had already gone viral. Passengers had shared clips of the incident on social media. Clara yelling, the quiet man remaining composed, and Francois stepping in to defend him. As the truth surfaced, the internet erupted. People were outraged, stunned, moved, and many felt deeply ashamed. Inside the airport, as other travelers made their way through immigration and customs, tension rippled through the staff. Security officers stood at attention, and airline employees whispered and pointed. "Did you hear? He was on our flight, President Ibrahim Traoré," and Clara insulted him. Meanwhile, Clara stood in a small office near the jet bridge, her face drained of color, hands ice cold. The airline manager paced before her. "Do you understand what you've done?" he snapped. "I didn't know," she whispered. "That's not the issue," he said sharply. "It's not about who he is. It's about what you said. This flight is not for someone of your color. You smell like you haven't bathed in a month." Clara stared at the floor as tears streamed down her face. "I was just doing my job," she said softly. "No," the manager replied, voice steady and stern. "You were misusing your authority, and this isn't the first time." Clara gasped. "What do you mean? You think we haven't had complaints? You think this is the first incident?" She froze. Outside, President Ibrahim Traoré sat calmly in his vehicle. The airport director stood beside him, sweating nervously, trying to explain. "Mr. President, we are deeply sorry. If we had known..." Traoré raised his hand gently. "That's exactly the problem," he said. "You only care once you know." The director fell silent. "I didn't fly today to test anyone," Traoré continued. "I flew as an ordinary citizen. I wanted to experience what the people go through, and now I do." He looked out at the airport terminal. "That woman didn't just insult me," he said. "She disrespected millions of Africans, both poor and wealthy. She reminded us how racism still hides in many hearts." The airport director nodded solemnly. "She's been relieved of her duties." Traoré said nothing. His silence was more powerful than any rebuke. A reporter approached, calling out, "Mr. President, will you press charges?" He met her eyes calmly. "No," he said. "I don't need to imprison anyone to make a statement. The world has seen what happened. That's enough." Inside, Clara sat alone. Her uniform now felt like a mask she could no longer wear. Her phone buzzed constantly. Messages from strangers, former classmates, distant colleagues. "You're trending. For all the wrong reasons. How could you say something like that? I hope you feel ashamed." One message stood out. It was from her mother. "I raised you better than this. I'm disappointed." Clara dropped her phone. She wanted to scream, cry, disappear, but she knew she had to face the consequences. Later that evening, a press conference was held outside the presidential palace in Ouagadougou. President Traoré stepped onto the stage wearing his military jacket, the national flag pinned proudly to his chest. Reporters crowded in. Cameras flashed, microphones aimed. He spoke slowly and clearly, his voice meant for the entire world. "This morning, I boarded a flight as a regular," the passenger began. "I wore no title. I didn't arrive with an entourage. I didn't need anyone to know my name." He paused. "But what I experienced wasn't just poor service. It was hatred, disrespect, and shame. Not directed at me as a person, but aimed at those who believe. That real power only comes in a suit and tie, and those who think that skin color defines worth." Looking straight into the camera, he continued, "I want the world to understand. No human being is above another. You don't have to be a president. To deserve respect, you only need to be human." The audience clapped. Some shouted, "Yes!" while others wiped away tears. Traoré raised his hand once more. "I forgive her," he said. A wave of surprise swept through the room. "Yes, I forgive her," he repeated, not out of weakness, but because the message has been delivered. She now knows the impact of her actions. It's up to her whether she chooses to grow or remain unchanged. He concluded with a powerful reminder. Let us never forget. True strength lies not in the title you carry, but in how you treat others. The crowd rose to their feet, applauding. That night, news outlets across Africa and Europe replayed his words again and again. People discussed it in classrooms, living rooms, and offices. Students debated it. Teachers turned it into a lesson. Never judge someone by their appearance. Every person deserves dignity. You never know who someone truly is. Even Clara, still alone in her room, watched the broadcast. Her eyes were swollen, her face weary. She hadn't eaten or slept. The weight of guilt pressed down on her, but one phrase echoed in her mind. I forgive her. It broke something inside her. She sat down to write a letter, by hand. No cameras, no publicists, only her words. Dear President Ibrahim Traoré, I am sorry, not because you are a president, but because you are a fellow human being, and I failed to treat you that way. I was blinded by pride, clouded by ignorance. You showed me a kind of strength I've never known. You had every reason to humiliate me, but you chose forgiveness. I'll never forget this moment, and I hope someday I can prove that. I've changed. Clara, she mailed the letter, uncertain if he would ever read it. But deep inside, she hoped. In the presidential office in Burkina Faso, sunlight streamed through the windows. A letter rested on President Ibrahim Traoré's desk, Clara's handwritten apology. He read it once more. Her words were clear and sincere. Excuses were gone, only regret remained and a promise to grow. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. A knock came at the door. Come in, he said. His assistant walked in holding a file. Mr. President, we've received hundreds of letters, messages of support from citizens, apologies from airline staff, even drawings from children. People were truly moved, sir. He nodded thoughtfully. I never intended for any of this to happen. All I wanted that day was peace. I understand, sir, the assistant replied. But your silence spoke louder than any speech could. President Traoré stood and looked out the window. I've been thinking, he said. Forgiveness alone isn't enough. We also need education. What happened that day wasn't just a mistake. It reflected something deeper, still present in many hearts. He turned to his assistant. Start a national campaign. We'll call it the Dignity Project. Let's teach respect in schools, train frontline service workers, and encourage kindness everywhere. Let this become more than just a headline. Let it become real change. The assistant nodded with a smile. Yes, Mr. President. Meanwhile, in France, Clara had yet to return to her job. She'd been suspended without pay while the airline reviewed the incident. But she wasn't wasting her time. Each day, she volunteered at a local shelter for immigrants and refugees. She listened to their stories, served meals, cleaned bathrooms, and folded bed sheets. Her perspective had changed. She no longer saw people the way she used to. One morning, while handing out blankets, she noticed a young African girl sitting quietly in a corner, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. Clara sat down beside her. What's your name? She asked gently. The girl looked up with wide, unsure eyes. Aminata. That's a lovely name, Clara said with a warm smile. Kids at school call me dirty, Aminata whispered. Clara's heart sank. She took a deep breath. Then they're wrong, she said softly. You're not dirty. You're beautiful, just like your name. That night, Clara cried again, not from guilt, but from understanding. Words can leave scars that linger, even in the smallest hearts. She wrote again to the president. Dear Mr. President, I don't expect another response, but I wanted to say I'm changing, not because I was exposed, but because I was truly wrong. Every day, I meet people who remind me of you, quiet, kind, and full of worth. I see them now, really see them. Thank you for your silence. It was loud enough to wake me up. Clara. Months later, President Traoré visited a university in Ghana to speak about leadership and character. Students filled the large auditorium. Cameras were ready, and journalists held their pens and microphones. He stepped onto the stage wearing his usual simple clothes. The room grew quiet. My story isn't unique, he began. Millions face disrespect every day, not because they've done anything wrong, but because someone decided they weren't worthy. He paused and looked around. I was called dirty, told I didn't belong, and laughed at, not as a leader, but as a man, with dark skin. I stayed silent, not because I couldn't speak, but because I chose to listen. The students leaned in, paying close attention. Listen, to the pain of others, to your own thoughts, to the voice inside that says everyone deserves respect. He ended with a quote displayed behind him on the screen. If your power makes others feel small, it is not power, it is weakness. The audience rose, applauding loudly. That quote soon appeared painted on school walls, printed on shirts, and shared on posters in airports worldwide. If your power makes others feel small, it is not power, it is weakness. Years later, many would remember that flight as a moment when the world paused to reflect. The day a simple man in Satua taught the world about dignity. The day a proud woman healed and grew stronger. The day silence spoke louder than hate. This lesson lived on, not just in books or speeches, but in how people treated those around them, whether in first class, economy, or on the street. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, share with friends, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next upload. Thank you for watching.